Many of you may not know this, but I was actually a part of a musical back whenever I was in high school. It was a musical called Back to the 80s, which featured a lot of amazing 80s hits, including stuff like Wham!, Michael Jackson, and just a whole crap ton of stuff. It was just filled to the brim. And since I was so interested in acting in musicals, I went to go see Phantom of the Opera in New York City. And I was blown away by the people who were behind it, the production value, the songs, the cast. It was just absolutely amazing. And coming off of that, I went onto Netflix one day and saw that they had Shrek the Musical. And I thought to myself, what in the world? I thought it was going to be some sort of production that was just thrown together in just a sham of a musical. But I'm happy to report that I was wrong. Shrek the Musical is unironically amazing. Now, unlike Shrek, where I mostly like it for the memes, somebody once told me the world is gonna roll me. Shrek the Musical is authentic and feels really emotional. Something that I think the original Shrek was sort of lacking. And while the movie did have its emotional moments, I feel like the musical does a much better job at providing much more emotional impact than the movie ever could. And before you comment saying, Josh, is Smash Mouth in this version? No, it doesn't open up with All Star. I know, that's where a lot of people drop off because the best part of that movie was the Somebody once told me. Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly that. Now, you're probably wondering why I prefer Shrek the Musical over the movie. And that's why I'm going to be going into some detail on why I do prefer it today in this video. Now, Shrek the Musical stars Brian Darcy James as Shrek, Sutton Foster as Fiona, Christopher Sieber as Lord Farquaad, and Daniel Breaker as Donkey. And these four do absolutely amazing. Now, I don't say this lightly, but if these four actors didn't nail their parts and make it their own, there's no way that this musical would have worked out. Because without their amazing voices as well as their portrayal of these characters, there's no way that you'd actually care about any of them by the time that this film is over. And when I say film, I mean musical, of course. Come on, it's a film, technically. It's on Netflix! What is a flick? Now, I'm about to go into some story details for Shrek the Musical, which, ironically enough, are actually slightly different than the movie. So if you haven't seen the Shrek the Musical, I can't believe I'm gonna say this, but spoilers for Shrek the Musical. Now let's do a little bit of a comparison real quick. How does Shrek the movie start out? We get a little bit of exposition about the fairy tale lifestyle, and then we get into adult Shrek. Sure, quite a simple and easy opening, right? There's no real background into how he grew up or where he grew up. But hear me out. The musical decides to do something different. Whereas Shrek the movie starts out at adulthood, Shrek the Musical decides to start out at Shrek's childhood, where his parents actually send him away because he's too grown up at the age of 7. So it's time to go away. You're ready to move out, son. I know you're 7 years old, but here's your bags. Go away. Now, this is where the musical really gets its foot in the door. Starting out at Shrek's childhood makes us feel for him more, because you can tell that during this opening bit, Shrek does want friends, and he does really care about people. And he really just wanted to be a normal person, because you see here, he waves at Fiona. Also, yes, that is young Fiona right there. She passes by Shrek during the opening song. And you can see there with Shrek's little wave that he's interested in, like, becoming friends with people. But then after this opening song, which is a bop, by the way, we get tossed into where the movie starts. Basically at this outhouse where Shrek starts to sing along with this song. A Big, Bright, Beautiful World. That's a fantastic song, by the way. One of my favorites in this entire musical. And you hear it a lot in other songs, kind of sprinkled in, and it's really interesting because it's kind of like its flagship moment. Now, after a little bit of exposition, and of course a fart joke on a flower. Sorry about that, flower. I know you're probably dead now. We get that view into Shrek, who had turned into a hardened adult. Whereas he wanted friends as a child, Shrek doesn't want friends anymore. Instead, every time he meets someone new, he pushes them away, and when the fairy tale creatures are forced to invade his swamp, you can imagine how well that goes. What are you doing in my swamp? Someone who's not really interested in meeting people, getting met by a ton of people, that's a recipe for disaster. Also, unlike the movie, the musical gives these side characters a ton of ground to work with, especially a lot of these fairy tale creatures. They have basically their own little subplot going here. Also, I really love the actor that plays Pinocchio, just absolutely amazing. That falsetto makes my throat hurt because it's so high. Now, after Shrek starts his quest to go get his swamp back, we meet, of course, Donkey.
Hey, how you doing?
Played by the absolutely amazing Daniel Breaker.
Can I just say, that was incredible? Man, they were tripping over themselves to get away from you. I like that.
And after this little short introduction of Donkey, we get one of my favorite songs of this musical, Don't Let Me Go, which is basically Donkey saying, hey, listen man, I want to be by your side. And while the movie version does give us a little bit of exposition on why Donkey really kind of wants to stay with Shrek, I feel like this musical number really gives us a clear indication that Donkey really does want to care about Shrek.
I'll be a friend when others despise you.
This song is freaking amazing. And yet again, a bop! So we get our next character introduction like very soon after. We meet the illustrious, the amazing Christopher Cyber, who plays Lord Farquaad. And now let's just say that Chris decided to go a very interesting path with Lord Farquaad. Whereas the movie version is kind of sinister in the way that he portrays himself, this version of Lord Farquaad is much more flamboyant, and I'm sure that's exactly what Christopher was going for. And as you'll see throughout this entire musical, Lord Farquaad is a very different person in this version. Sure, he's still evil and everything, but he feels less of a threat. Also, can we appreciate that Christopher literally stays on his knees the entire musical? Lord Farquaad is really short, so in this version, they decide to make Christopher be on his knees throughout the entire musical. And I think it's a fantastic bit, and the way they do it's fantastic. And after the magical mirror is introduced, we get introduced to, of course, Princess Fiona. But not just Princess Fiona as an adult. No, we get to meet her and watch as she has to go through her life in the tower. Whereas in the movie, like Shrek, we only got to see the adult version of Fiona. In this version, we get to see her child years, her teenage years, and then up to her adult years. Because Fiona spent a lot of time in that tower, and this definitely shows. Because you see her start out as this really hopeful child, into a cynical teenager, into this dear God, help me, I want out of this tower adult. And Sutton Foster, God bless you. Sutton Foster is Fiona, and I absolutely adore this rendition of her. I felt like the movie version could be sort of stale at times and enjoyable in some. Sutton Foster decides to take a completely different route and make Fiona the dorkiest and the cutest character I've ever seen in my life. She makes a lot of weird voices and she makes a lot of weird faces, and I think that just makes Fiona seem a lot more charming and a lot more likable. And some may think that Fiona's crazy, but yes, wouldn't you be crazy too if you spent so many days inside of this tower? Personally, I don't blame her. You know, I only stay in this room in my entire house all times of the day, 24/7. So I can kind of get the stir craziness. But you know, I don't really think that it's had that much of an effect on me. What? But yeah, Fiona is a freaking baller in this movie and I love her. Anyway, as we continue through the story, we get more songs, more epic moments between Donkey and Shrek, and eventually Shrek gets his quest from Lord Farquaad. Now, I mentioned earlier that Lord Farquaad actually doesn't seem like a threat in this movie, and I don't think that any moment more represents that than the moment that he meets Shrek. Lord Farquaad isn't on this tower where he can talk down to Shrek. He's face to face with Shrek, and you kind of see this fear of him.
Therefore, under my jurisdiction... Now look here, half-pint. Wait a minute.
And I like that. Lord Farquaad's actually relatable. Also, for those of you who care and are actually in the musicals, there's a reference to Wicked's Defying Gravity at the very end of this song. And you can tell because the lights go green. It's purposely referencing Wicked. There's actually a lot of references to other productions in this musical. I give the, old tip of the hat if you can find all of them. I still think there's some that I missed as well. Anyway, after talking to Shrek about onions and, a little hair sprouting on him, they eventually get to the castle and tower that Fiona's getting held at. And after a little nudge there from Shrek, Donkey makes it across, almost dying. Yes, that's not terribly important, but they make it and they get to the tower and are eventually able to find Fiona. Josh, you missed an important part of the musical? I don't know, what could I possibly have missed? Donkey Pot Pie! What? Yeah, Donkey Pot Pie. That's a musical number in this musical. And of course, it's referencing the dragon and Donkey's relationship. Where at the beginning, the dragon is going to eat Donkey and turn him into a Donkey Pot Pie. Donkey's able to talk his way out of it. And eventually, when saying Donkey Pot Pie, it means like a lovable kind of Donkey Pot Pie. I know, it's really strange, but you know, I'm not gonna complain about it because it's freaking baller. A Donkey Pot Pie! And before I forget, I want to just say that I give the old tip of the hat to the set designers and the freaking costume designers. Every time during this musical, when you see a character, their costume just fits so well with the universe and the whole Shrek theme. I almost said Shrek Cinematic Universe, but I don't think we've reached that point yet. Now, there's a whole rescue scene where Shrek goes through and helps Fiona and saves Fiona, and also does some backflips. And they make it out alive. Oh my god, that's such a twist.
More or less, I must admit.
And after escaping, they decide to settle for the night. Now, I don't say this lightly, but this next scene is by far my favorite in the entire musical. And honestly, one of my favorite musical songs of all time. And that's saying something. Freaking right up top there is Music of the Night from Phantom of the Opera. Donkey starts asking Shrek about who he wants to be, who he would love to be as an individual, and ultimately what his dream is. And where we sort of get a little bit of like hints here in the movie, the musical gives us an absolutely emotional song to show what Shrek really does want. And this one is Who I'd Be. I guess I'd be a hero with sword and armor clashing, looking semi-dashing, a shield within my grip. I guess I'd be a hero and live a life of daring while smelling like a herring upon a Viking ship. That's who I'd be. That's who I'd be. While I was recording that, I actually almost sung the entire song, so you can tell how much I love it. But after this emotional song that features all three of these main characters, Shrek, Donkey, and Fiona, it ends up being one of the most beautiful songs out of this entire musical. And that's the end of Act 1. That's where the middle section of this entire musical is. God, I feel like we haven't even talked about much at all. This freaking musical is huge. Now, y'all remember earlier how I said that Fiona is probably the dorkiest character in this entire musical? Well, Sutton Foster decides to take it to a whole nother level after the first act break, with the song Morning Person, where it's about Fiona basically awakening up after being an ogre for the night.
Good morning, birds. Good morning, trees.
And throughout this entire song, she definitely shows herself as more of a funny character and much more of a relatable character here. And yes, for those wondering, the bird is there, and yes, it does explode. Hashtag RIP. Now, after a little bit of traveling, Fiona and Shrek, they start to take jabs at each other, saying, hey, you didn't have it so hard, I had it worse off than you did. Fiona said stuff like, I had to live my whole life in a tower in isolation from my family, where Shrek said, oh, I had it hard too, my life was just lonely and I just had nobody this entire time. And after some back and forth in a very good song,
20 years.
My dad and mom sent me away.
they both start to realize that, hey, they have way more in common than they let on. Both of their parents sent them away, and that's where that opening piece of Shrek's story really becomes important. Where in the movie we never got that piece of information, here in the musical we see these two characters as two sides of the same coin. Both of them were tossed away by their families. Both of them lived in isolations for most of their lives. And fate had brought them together. I always felt that Shrek fell for Fiona because of how relatable she was to him. In the musical, I see it more as an emotional connection that these two have. And I know that's reading a lot into this musical because it's Shrek. It shouldn't be having this much of an emotional impact in the story. But because of this whole situation, it does feel that way. And I unironically love that part of this story. Because you see these two characters in a whole new light, and with that added bonus that we saw at the beginning of this musical, I feel like the opening bit does show that Shrek and Fiona are both emotionally hurt from what they had gone through. It wasn't just the life of isolation that Fiona had to deal with, it was also Shrek. It was forced on him, not only by society, but by his own parents. Same with Fiona. But this moment is definitely one of the more emotionally connected pieces for this musical for these two characters. And there's a farting contest, and they fart a lot, actually. There's a lot of farting. Probably more so than the movie itself. Now, I mentioned earlier that Lord Farquaad gets a lot of character development in this rendition compared to the movie. In the movie, we get a couple scenes here and there, but here we get a full song and multiple songs about what sort of issues that Lord Farquaad had with his father. And I say this, but I'm never going to repeat it again. Lord Farquaad in Shrek the Musical has daddy issues. Like hardcore daddy issues, oh my god. But his song about his father and how he wants to be better than him sheds a lot of light onto what Lord Farquaad really wants. He wants people to stop looking down on him and wants people to actually start admiring for who he is. It certainly does give him a lot more emotional depth than just, hey, there's this evil guy trying to throw fairy tale creatures away. So fast forward a bit and we get to Shrek and Fiona and Donkey again. Now after traveling for a bit, they decide to settle down for a while. And during this next section, we get an awesome song from Donkey that's basically saying, hey, Shrek, Fiona, I see that you two like each other a lot. You may even love each other. Freaking do something about it. Also, the three blind mice are there, and I think that's an amazing bit. Because later on in the credits, they will actually be facing the wrong direction when trying to face the crowd. And I think that's one of the most clever moments in the entire musical. And there's not much attention drawn to it, which is why I really like it. But after this really groovy tune, we get into a very emotional song from Shrek, where he's basically trying to find a way to say, Princess, I really do like you. I just don't know how to say it. You hear him singing to himself, saying stuff like, I picked this flower for you because it's pretty. I don't think it's pretty, but I think that you're pretty like this flower. And it's very emotionally impacting because you can tell that Shrek's never felt this way about someone. And he struggles to get a lot of the information out. And as you're watching it, you start to really care about him and say, hey, I really do want you to succeed, guy. Freaking go for it. You got this. But of course, that's not where the story is going to end right now. Shrek hears Fiona and Donkey talking about what he believes to be him. No one could ever love such an ugly and vile creature. Where Shrek thinks that Fiona's talking about him, Fiona is actually talking about herself. Because at night she turns into an ogre. And in this moment, she's confessing to Donkey that, hey, no one could ever love me. But Shrek thinks that she's talking about him. You start to really see that emotional distrust and disconnect that Shrek has for people. For someone who had never felt love and has never felt loved, this really stung him. And the next day when Lord Farquaad ends up picking up Fiona, he basically says, alright, bye, see ya, later. At that point, he's done and doesn't want anything to do with someone who would talk about him behind his back like that. And I put those in quotes because we know that's not what she was saying. And at this point, Shrek is done. Completely done with people, done with friends, and done with love. And after throwing Donkey out, he starts singing a song about building this emotional wall. Not only emotional, but he means literally physically a wall that he wants to build in front of people. So that way no one can get to him and no one can mess with him anymore. And as a viewer, this is really sad to see. Shrek had just started to open up, and to be hurt like that is just something that a lot of us can relate to. And while most of us wouldn't end up building a 10-foot wall, I think that most of us could actually relate to the situation that Shrek is in. This betrayal and this hurt that really sort of pushes us away from people. So after a lot of plot A, we now head back to plot B with all the fairy tale creatures, where they're basically fed up with being called freaks. So what do? They sing an amazing musical number called Freak Flag. Let your freak flag fly. Let your freak flag fly. Raise it way up high. Let your freak flag fly. I wish I could play all the actual songs, but I'd get copyright. Freak Flag is definitely on my top 5 list for this entire musical because it's just so inspirational and absolutely amazing. If you haven't heard it and you want to listen to any one of these particular songs in this musical, first of all, I'd say Who I'd Be. That's a given. But after Who I'd Be, I would say listen to Freak Flag because Freak Flag is an inspirational song about being who you are and who you're meant to be. And who you're meant to be is yourself. But yeah, yada yada yada, they sing a lot of songs, and Donkey informs Shrek that, hey, idiot! She wasn't talking about you, she was talking about herself. Now you go get her. You go get the woman of your love life. Your life lover. You're the woman of your dreams. So we get to the church where Shrek has interrupted the wedding service. And he confesses to Fiona that, hey, I'm an idiot and I love you. And after being hesitant to accept his apology, Shrek starts to sing,
it's a big, bright, beautiful world. True love is blind. Maybe you won't mind the view.
The beautiful song, just absolutely amazing. Also, Lord Farquaad's father arrives, and he's a minor. I mean, literally a minor. His father is is grumpy. So thanks, musical. I didn't expect to get that information, but thank you. But the whole point of his father is saying that, hey, Lord Farquaad doesn't really have anyone to blame. And as his father says, you were living in my basement your entire life. Yeah, Lord Farquaad's basically a loser. So long story short, Fiona transforms into an ogre, Donkey and the dragon show up, Lord Farquaad dies, her and Shrek kiss, and she turns into the true love form, which is, of course, a beautiful Just kidding, it's an ogre, of course, because no matter what you look like, you are beautiful. And it's what's on the inside that matters. As with Freak Flag, this whole story is about this absolute acceptance of who you are, and the true meaning of love not being outer beauty, but of that inner beauty. Where people feared Shrek because of the way he looked, Fiona saw into him and saw the beauty that was inside of him. This caring, loving guy who just needed the right person to help him with it. And Fiona, who for all of her life thought that the fairy tale life was what she wanted, but in reality, she just wanted to be with this guy, this really gross dude who made her happy. But yeah, Lord Farquaad dies, and after that, it's a celebration. Because the oppressor is gone, and all that's left to do is to party and to finally embrace who they are. Shrek has found someone who loved him for who he was. Fiona has found someone who not only loves her for who she really is, but also gives her that fairy tale love that she so desperately wanted. And while it's not necessarily that typical fairy tale love, she has love nonetheless. And as the credits are about to roll, they of course end with what everyone was expecting, what everyone was wanting. Now I'm a believer. Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. But yeah, Shrek the Musical is freaking amazing. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. This musical is legitimately one of the best that I have ever seen. While it's definitely not my favorite musical, I'm looking at you, Phantom of the Opera, I do think it is unironically amazing. And if you have not seen it, and if you've not given it a chance, give it a shot. Go give it a watch. Because I think you will be pleasantly surprised. It's full of heart, full of humor, and just full of absolutely emotional moments that I don't think the movie was able to pull off. And while of course it does have its roots in the movie itself, the musical just takes everything that the movie gave as foundation and ran with it. And with all these amazing character moments, the musical is definitely the way to watch the Shrek story. But yeah, that's my honest take on Shrek the Musical. I know this is a lot different than what I normally do, and honestly the format's a lot longer, but I just felt like I really wanted to talk about this musical because it deserves to be watched and enjoyed by everyone. Like I said, it's on Netflix now and anyone can go watch it because it's all there and it's all amazing. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this basically movie review, musical review. I don't know what this was. But if you want to see more things like this, I'd love to give some more. Because I have a lot of different opinions on a lot of different movies that I think y'all would be really interested in listening to. Once you watch Shrek the Musical, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. If you hated it, I can understand why, but I think you're wrong. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and you all stay awesome.